In the Elder Scrolls V, Skyrim, are the Nords of Windhelm racist? The answer may come as a surprise. What's up guys, Acerthorn here and welcome to another lore and discussion video. In my first lore and discussion video, I defended the Stormcloaks as not being as racist as people often believe. In it, I made a clear distinction between the Nords of Windhelm and the Stormcloak army. In that video, I mentioned Torbjorn's Shattershield, and I said this about his refusal to pay the Argonians. There is no way you can salvage that line. That is pure racism, and there is simply no way around it. However, there are always two sides to any argument, and now that I've had several months to think about this, as well as you guys, my lovely fans, posting comments about this ordeal, I honestly have to say, I think I now have a different viewpoint on this. This video will not be about the Stormcloak army, Ulfric Stormcloak, or the government of Eastmarch. I've already covered in depth how I feel about that. I may make a sequel to that video sometime, but this video is not it. This video is dedicated to the alleged acts of racism committed by the private citizens of Windhelm. I would personally like to thank a YouTuber and loyal fan of mine, Thor's Z Wolf, for providing a good chunk of the lore that I will be discussing today. While I will be mentioning things that he did not mention in the comments, the lore he did mention served as the catalyst for me to conduct the lore research for this video, so nearly everything in this video is directly or indirectly his doing. So with that out of the way, let's get on with the discussion proper. First, I would like to discuss the alleged acts of racism against the Argonians. The biggest complaint I hear about the way the Argonians are treated by the Nords of Windhelm is how their employers supposedly treat them. Supposedly, they work the Argonians twice as hard as their Nord employees and pay them a fraction as much. Scout's Mini-Marches even says as such. When we speak to Torbjorn's Shattershield about the Argonians' wage dispute, he gives us this line.
Those boots aren't worth the septims I do pay them. I'm not giving them coin I could give to good Nord workers.
Now, at first glance, this appears to be a clear-cut case of blatant racial discrimination in employment. But look just the slightest bit beyond the surface, and it actually seems a little bit more legit. Let's take a step back and think about this for a minute. Why exactly is racism bad? In the real world, racism is wrong because we're all human beings. Our skin color is purely a cosmetic difference, and it doesn't in any way, shape, or form affect our ability to perform any skills. Numerous double-blind studies have been conducted to try and find measurable differences in the intellectual and physical abilities of people of different races, and all of them, at least those that were truly double-blind and devoid of any prejudice, show that there is no statistically measurable difference in what a black person can achieve, either physically or intellectually, compared to a white person. However, that doesn't really apply to the races of Tamriel. The races of the Elder Scrolls games are indeed very different from each other, and that, ladies and gentlemen, changes everything. So let's think about this for a minute. Let's look at what the Argonians in Windhelm actually do for a living, and let's juxtapose that with what they are actually good at. What do the Argonians in Windhelm do for a living? They're dock workers, they're manual laborers. They load and unload cargo on and off the ships. What are Argonians typically good at? In Elder Scrolls games, starting skill bonuses are usually used to show racial aptitude for various skills. For example, in Morrowind, Oblivion, and Skyrim, orcs have initial bonuses to their armorer and smithing skills to show, in lore, they are revered across Tamriel for their blacksmithing work. So using that scale, what are Argonians usually good at? Well, in Skyrim, Argonians receive bonuses to such skills as sneak, lockpicking, and pickpocket. Well, that hardly makes them suited for manual labor jobs. Maybe their aptitude for lockpicking might make them good locksmiths, but they aren't picking locks for a living. They're doing manual labor. I mean, just imagine if you were in personnel at your company in the real world, and you were looking at job applications. Imagine if somebody had actually included expert pickpocket in their list of job skills. That guy would have a better chance of getting invited to a job interview if he literally left that section blank, wouldn't he? By contrast, let's look at the race that Torbjorns says are better than the Argonians, the Nords. Now, obviously he is a Nord, so it's very easy to mistake his preference for Nords as blatant racism. But let's give him just the teeniest benefit of the doubt and look at this from an objective standpoint. What are Nords good at? They have bonuses mostly to combat skills. While those skills don't directly assist in being dock workers, although military service would certainly be a resume booster at many firms in the real world, lifting those heavy greatswords and lugging that armor around certainly builds muscles. At the end of the day, biologically speaking, compared to the Argonians, Nords are simply sturdier, huskier, and generally all around better equipped for manual labor. So I ask you, my adoring fans, why shouldn't the Nord workers under Torbjorn's employ be paid better if their job performance and productivity is, quite simply, better? The Argonians may feel like they're being worked to death for petty coin, but while they might be doing the best they personally can do, that doesn't necessarily mean that their objective job performance is on par with the Nords who are simply better at their work. The key word being objective. Now, I know what you're thinking. That's all speculation. You're basing your theories off a pure gameplay mechanic. How about something that can't be misconstrued as a game mechanic? How about something in dialogue or in a book, so it is unquestionably lore rather than gameplay? Okay, how about when we actually go to Torbjorn to negotiate higher wages for the Argonians? When he tells us that he believes his Argonian employees are inferior to his Nord employees, we have the typical dialogue options to either persuade, intimidate, or bribe him. But notice the exact dialogue option we have if we want to use the persuasion option. We're not trying to convince him that racism is wrong. We're suggesting that their productivity would increase if they are financially incentivized to do so. Now, why would the player character choose that sentence over anything else? Well, I have a theory. Sometimes in the Elder Scrolls games, Bethesda forgets to include explanations for things because they assume the player already knows what they're supposed to do. If you're only subscribed to this channel for my discussion videos, well, first of all, you're hurting my feelings, but second, you might be interested in hearing that I've already come across a few of those moments in my Oblivion Let's Play. Yeah, that is just dumb. How is it that I just magically know this woman is the person I need to go to? Oh, and I also just magically know that she's in this general area. This is dumb. My theory is that the player character, in-universe, is supposed to already know that the Argonians are crap manual laborers, and Bethesda just plumb forgot to write in some exposition that actually explains that. My theory is further corroborated by the line that Torbjorn gives you if you fail this speech check.
They don't work now. Why should I waste more money?
So Torbjorn even admits, in no uncertain terms, that he pays the Argonians so poorly because their job performance merits their low pay, not simply because he's racist against Argonians. Indeed, we see direct evidence that Torbjorn's Shattered Shield is in fact an equal opportunity employer. Specifically, I'm referring to Savaris Atheron. She is the Dark Elf woman who you see harassed by two Nords when you first enter Windhelm. We'll discuss the Dark Elves in a minute, but for the time being, we actually see Savaris holding a rather respectable position in Torbjorn's shipping company. A position where she actually can do quite a bit of illegal harm, although we'll get to that in a minute. For now, the most important thing is that Torbjorn hired a person who isn't a Nord, and more importantly, put her in a position of management in this company. Why would he do that for somebody who isn't a Nord if he only wanted Nords doing anything for him but the most menial of tasks? And if you still think that the Argonians don't deserve the treatment they get, I've got one more piece of evidence to offer against them. Of all 4 Argonians in Windhelm, as of the events of Skyrim, can anyone in the comments name even a single one of those 4 who are ideal role models? Yeah, that's a bit of a toughie, isn't it? The closest we come to a good role model is Shavi, but even she has a history of being a bandit. Everyone else are just complete dickheads. Nitrinaza has given in to the cycle of hate and begun to hate the Nords as he believes the Nords hate him, the key word being believes. Stans in Shallows is a self-confessed skooma addict, and Scout's Mini-Marshes even openly admits to embezzling his employer's cargo.
The Nords don't like unloading their ships, so we do it instead. Sometimes cargo goes missing.
Okay, maybe you could argue that Scouts is only doing this out of retaliation for the way he and his people are treated by the Nords. Then again, what proof do we have of that? How do we know the Nords aren't treating them like crap in part because of the embezzlement they suspect is happening but can't prove? It's a chicken or egg scenario here. For those who don't know, a chicken or egg scenario is a common trope in storytelling, named after the classic riddle, which came first, the chicken or the egg. It refers to 2 or more events in a story where each event causes the other event to get progressively worse, but where the mutual retaliatory events have been going on for so long that it's impossible to tell which party actually started the cycle. For example, in Romeo and Juliet, the rivalry between the Montagues and the Capulets had been going on for a long time before the events of the play. With every passing day, one family would harass or assault the other family, ultimately culminating in the mutual murders of Mercutio and Tybalt. These actions were always considered by their actors to be righteous retaliation for a previous wrong, except that the chain of retaliatory events have been going on for so long that even Prince Aeschylus in-universe has given up trying to figure out which family started it and instead just issued mandates to both families. That is a chicken or egg scenario. Likewise, in Skyrim, because the cycle of hate between the Nords and Argonians of Skyrim has been going on for so long, we have no real way of knowing which is originally caused by which. But even if we accept that Scouts' embezzlement of cargo is in retaliation for his treatment by the Nords, rather than vice versa, did 2 wrongs make a right? Sure, maybe Torbjorn's treatment of him and his fellow Argonians is unfair, although I emphasize the word maybe because we need to take into account the aforementioned job performance issues. But Scouts' embezzlement is straight up criminal, which is the lesser of 2 evils here. So that about does it for the Argonians. But what about the other minority race in Windhelm, the Dark Elves? While we see the occasional instance of Dark Elves being harassed by the Nords of Skyrim, we also see plenty of other evidence that the Dark Elves are treated fairly by the Nords as well. Take, for instance, Savaris Atheron, the woman we see being harassed by the supposedly racist Nords when we first enter Windhelm. As I pointed out before, Savaris has a respectable job at one of the largest companies in Windhelm, so while she may be the victim of the occasional harassment by some people, she also knows firsthand that there are plenty of non-racist Nords in Windhelm. But even ignoring that for a minute, Rolf Stonefist and Argrenner, once honored, actually have reason to be suspicious of Savaris in particular, because she really is up to no good. We learn this during the quest Rise in the East, when we steal a journal from Savaris' office where we learn that she is in good with some pirates who ensure that everyone except her boss's ships are attacked and plundered to give her employer an unfair advantage. So this isn't an Imperial spy, but she is guilty of industrial sabotage. While she may not be working for the Imperials per se, she is still deserving of suspicion. When you first enter Windhelm, she pretends to be all innocent, just the innocent victim of Nord bullying and racism. But it's one thing to put up such an act during a single scene. It's quite another thing to live that lie 24/7, as Rise in the East clearly demonstrates. Savaris isn't the only example of a dark elf given a job of heavy responsibility and trust by a Nord. Idesi Sadri, the sister of the proprietor of Sadri's used wares, is governed by Torsten and Hilevi Cruelcy and entrusted to oversee the raising of their son Grimvar. Do you have any idea how much trust the Cruelcies must have in this woman to entrust her with raising their kid for them? Let me put this in perspective for you. In the tragedy of Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare, the nurse who raised Juliet in a similar way that Idesi raises Grimvar was the only member of the Capulet household who Juliet confided in regarding her relationship with Romeo, because she was the only member of the household who Juliet could trust with something so secret. Then there's the case of Balin Hlalu, one of the biggest examples of Dunmer's success in Windhelm. He owns a farm that rivals the Cruelcy's farm, Holly Frost. He freely admits that his fellow Dunmer complain too much, and that hard work is the best way to win the Nord's respect, not simply being a Nord yourself. However, the arguments against Dunmer racism in Windhelm go far deeper than just showing a mere 3 examples of Dunmer in Windhelm who have actually achieved prosperity, especially when they are clearly the minority among the Dunmer who mostly live in squalor. To really understand just how not racist the Nords of Windhelm are, we have to look to the attitudes of the Dunmer at nearly every time except when they aren't being actively harassed by the Nords or directly interacting with the player. In my video about the Stormcloaks being racist, I made the following comment. If anyone is racist in this whole ordeal, I think it's the Dark Elves, not the Nords. And the Dark Elves were forced to flee Morrowind and take up shelter elsewhere in Tamriel? What exactly happened when they arrived? Were they honest natural disaster refugees who were just given a raw deal when they sought sanctuary in their neighbor's territory? Or did they take their self-entitled attitudes with them to Skyrim, feel like they were entitled to sanctuary, and then were in for a rude awakening when the sovereign people of their new homes weren't gonna put up with their crap? To support that theory, I mostly relied on information from the events of Morrowind, which admittedly took place about 207 years before the events of Skyrim. However, since posting that video, I have become privy to several pieces of evidence in Skyrim that actually affirm my belief. Take, for instance, Yaras Rendar, the proprietor of the New Guinness Corner Club. When directly interacting with the player, he gives a well-rehearsed speech about how he would have kept walking after the Red Cure if he knew the Nords would be so unwelcoming. Wah, we're the victims. However, as I said a moment ago, it's easy to put on an act in a single scene. It's quite another thing to keep up that ruse 24/7 and live your lie constantly. So let's eavesdrop for a minute on a conversation that he has nearly every evening with Savaris Athrong when she comes to the Corner Club to eat dinner, shall we?
Don't you ever find it demeaning working for that Nord family?
Look, Amberus, I just came here for a drink. I don't need any trouble.
Fine then. I guess some Dunmer are content to be their pets.
Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to pretend I didn't hear that, and you're going to leave me alone. Deal?
Wow. So, who's the racist here? But that's just one conversation, and even then, one of the Dunmer is clearly not having any of Amberos's bullcrap, so maybe that's a fluke. To prove that this isn't a fluke, we must turn to the books of Skyrim. First, let's turn to one of the most commonly found in-game books that directly address the issue, Scourge of the Great Quarter by Fleegreth Horsebreaker. This is one of the pieces of evidence that was directly contributed by Thoris Z. Wolf. You can find a copy of this book in Dragon's Reach Yaras Quarters. The footage on screen right now shows you how to find it. Let's have a look at some of the passages from this book, shall we? The tragedies befalling Morrowind do bring forth pity from even the stoutest Nordic heart. Aww. The Dark Elves deserve our condolences, but thus far they do not show themselves deserving of the simplest acts of charity. Consider Riften. A number of the Dark Elves have made their homes there, but they are expected to earn their livelihoods as in any other citizen. They ply trades as merchants, work in the temple, and serve in the keep. Honest labor, to be admired from a race that was so recently in such dire straits as to even warrant this discussion. For an alternative approach, we only have to look at the once proud city of Windhelm to see what can happen when our arms are cast too wide open in welcome. Predictably, the lazy, discontented rabble has descended into squalor. They were not expected to contribute and so have not. The amount of unrest that they have provoked even within the proper city walls should give any Jarl reason to fear. So this book practically says outright what I theorized in my video about the Stormcloaks being racist. The Dunmer of Windhelm expected everything handed to them, didn't get it, naturally descended into squalor because the Nords of the city didn't want to go into the Great Quarter to clean up the Dunmer's messes when the Dunmer can just clean it up themselves, and because the Dunmer were so unwilling to do their own manual labor, they act like they're the victims of racism. On a side note, I would like to point out how Malthier Elinal, an employee of Amberus Rendar at the New Guinness Corner Club, likes to complain about the lack of guards patrolling the Great Quarter. However, this book, Scourge of the Great Quarter, suggests that this lack of guard patrolling isn't due to a desire to be away from the stinky gray-skinned bastards, but rather a desire to allow them to exercise a degree of self-government among themselves, kind of like the orc stronghold of Narzel Burr. But that's not the only in-game book that corroborates my belief that the Dark Elves are the real racists in Windhelm. Another book, which is found in the Arcanium of the College of Winterhold, is Dunmer of Skyrim by Athal Saris. The whole book is worth reading if you want to lose your lunch, but for the sake of keeping it brief, I would like to read for you the final paragraph in this book. So now, children of Skyrim, you have the truth of it. You may call this province home, but you can no sooner claim to own it than a cow can claim to own its master's field. You are just another breed of domestic animal, grazing stupidly while your higher beings plot your slaughter. Damn. Just damn. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Are the Nords of Windhelm racist against the Dark Elves and Argonians? With maybe the exception of a handful of Nords like Rolf Stonefist, who are not representative of the entire city's Nord population, I can safely say no. You know who are racist except for a discrete, non-racist minority? The Dark Elves. In fact, the Dark Elves are so racist, they put Adolf Hitler to shame. At least Hitler never spoke of the Jews as mere cattle. The Dark Elves see working for a Nord company to be the equivalent of being owned by them as pets. They see the Nords as mere cattle, and they see themselves as the natural masters of the Nords, despite having a different homeland from the Nords for the majority of Tamriel's history. They merely walked into Skyrim after losing their home to a volcanic eruption, and then acted like their mere presence meant they owned the place. The Dark Elves of Windhelm are not victims of racism. They are an entire race full of General Zods. And that will do it for today's video. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like this video and share it with your friends. Also, be sure to consider subscribing for more in-depth story analysis, and also check out some of my other Let's Plays, where I take a more lighthearted approach to these games and just have a good time. In the meantime, however, I am Acer Thorn, and I will see you guys later.